The ocean's beauty can vanish in seconds, turning calm waters into a battleground for survival. From a bull shark flipping a raft in St. Lucia, to a mako slamming a jet ski in Portugal, and great whites striking surfers and tourists, each attack reveals the sea's hidden dangers. In this video, we'll uncover 6 terrifying shark encounters that prove how quickly paradise can transform into a nightmare. Watch closely. These stories will shock you. On July 19, 2021, a group of 7 friends gathered near the mouth of the Black River in St. Lucia for what was meant to be an unforgettable day of adventure. The island was bright and humid, with thick jungle pressing close to the riverbanks and the steady roar of water rushing through the rapids. This part of the river was well known for its rough current, but it was also a popular site for tourists seeking thrills and excitement. Among the group was Daniel Morris, a 29-year-old teacher from Toronto who had been traveling through the Caribbean with his college friends. Alongside him was his childhood companion Marcus Bell, who worked as a paramedic back home in Florida. They had been planning this trip for months, looking forward to testing themselves against the swift water. The others in the raft included 2 cousins from New York, a newly married couple from Texas, and an old university mate of Daniel's who had joined them at the last minute. All 7 had bonded quickly, sharing laughs and snapping pictures before pushing off into the churning stream. The early part of the ride was thrilling. Their raft bounced against waves, paddles slicing through the swirling flow as they shouted to keep rhythm. Spray soaked their faces, and the sound of rushing water filled the air. The friends felt alive, exhilarated by the force of nature pressing against them. Yet beneath the surface, unseen and waiting, danger lurked. Suddenly the water ahead rippled with violent force. A massive shape surged upward from the murky depths. In a flash, a 12-foot bull shark erupted from below, its jaws locking onto one rafter's leg. The impact flipped the raft violently, sending bodies tumbling into the river. Panic exploded. The predator attacked again, lunging with brutal speed. Neoprene tore like paper as the animal dragged victims beneath the frothing surface. Screams rang out over the roaring rapids, mixing with the sharp crack of broken paddles. The friends thrashed, trying desperately to grab hold of the overturned raft or cling to fragments of gear. Foam churned red as the shark circled back, ramming and snapping at anything that moved. The raft capsized completely, spilling everyone into the current. Blood swirled with the water, spreading across the surface as the predator struck again. Within moments, the river was chaos. Some rafters were swept away by the fast current, pulled under before anyone could react. The beast lunged again and again, thrashing with terrifying strength. In just 4 minutes, Daniel Morris, Marcus Bell, and the 2 cousins from New York were fatally mauled, torn away by the combined force of the shark and the rapids. The 3 survivors fought desperately, clutching floating debris, battered and gasping as they tried to stay above the waves. Their cries carried across the river, a desperate sound that echoed through the thick trees. The cries of the 3 who still floated above the surface grew weaker as the current carried them farther downstream. Each second felt endless as they kicked and struggled to keep their heads above the rushing flow. The overturned raft drifted in pieces, broken by the force of the river and the assault of the giant fish. The air smelled of mud and iron as the red-stained water rushed toward the mangrove edges. The survivors clung tightly to whatever they could grasp. One held onto half of a paddle, another to a section of the shredded raft, and the third to a rope that had come loose during the chaos. The rapids battered their bodies, their skin cut by sharp rocks beneath the surface, yet the instinct to live kept them moving. The bull shark circled once more, its dorsal fin slicing through the brown water, but the fast current soon pulled the animal away. Its shadow slipped back into the depths, leaving silence broken only by the crashing waves. Moments later, local guides and emergency teams rushed toward the riverbank. They had been stationed farther down the channel, alerted by the violent splashing and the fading screams. Launching small boats into the stream, they reached the 3 who still held on. Arms pulled them from the water, placing them into safety aboard the rescue craft. Exhausted and trembling, the survivors lay motionless as the boat sped back to land. The scene on the bank was grim. 4 lives had been lost in only minutes, and the wide river gave back no trace of their bodies. Rescue workers scanned the surface, calling out for any sign, but the current had already carried the victims into the open mouth of the sea. Medical staff rushed to tend to the wounded. Cuts, bruises, and deep bites marked their skin, Yet the shock in their eyes told a harsher story than the wounds themselves. As news spread through the small island community, warnings were posted near the entrance to the Black River. Officials explained that bull sharks often hunt close to river mouths, especially in the hot season when fish gather in the shallows. They called them one of the most dangerous predators because of their habit of swimming inland where people least expect them. For the families left behind, grief mixed with disbelief. What had begun as a celebration of friendship had ended in tragedy. Memorials were planned in hometowns far away, while the survivors carried the memory of those 4 minutes with them for the rest of their lives. Though the water calmed and the jungle grew quiet again, the fear of what lurked beneath stayed alive in every heart that heard the story. On October 14, 2024, the clear skies above Portugal's Algarve coast lit the waters in shades of blue and silver. The waves rolled in steady sets, their crests flashing white as they struck the rocky shoreline. Among those gathered offshore was Adrian Blake, a 27-year-old thrill-seeker who had built his life around extreme water sports. Born and raised in Brighton, England, Adrian had grown up with the sea as his playground. His childhood was filled with surfing competitions and diving lessons, and later he transitioned into stunt riding on jet skis. Known among his circle for daring moves, he often pushed himself to attempt maneuvers others avoided. After years of practice, Adrian had started sharing his adventures online. With each new clip, his following grew larger. By 2024, he had become well known on social platforms for his fearless energy and creativity on the water. Friends admired his discipline and the countless hours he spent perfecting tricks. He had traveled to coastal spots across Europe, but he often returned to the Algarve for its clear waters and lively swells. This trip was no different. Adrian wanted to perform a bold, hands-free stunt on his jet ski and capture it on film. That afternoon, the waves grew more restless. Wind swept across the surface, raising choppy conditions that made balance more difficult. Adrian prepared his machine, checking the throttle and adjusting his stance as he revved across the surf. Spectators nearby watched as the jet ski skipped and bounced along the rolling swells. Adrian leaned back, lifted his hands away from the bars, and tried to steady his body. It was a risky move, but one he had trained for repeatedly. Suddenly, the water beneath him broke apart with violent force. From below surged a short-fin mako, a powerful predator reaching nearly 10 feet in length. The shark's momentum carried it upward like a missile. Its body slammed against the jet ski with tremendous impact, shaking the craft and sending Adrian flying into the sea. The blow was so strong that the machine tilted sideways, and the rider struck the water hard, stunned by the sudden fall. In an instant, sharp teeth grazed his thigh and calf. The predator tore through the neoprene, slicing skin and muscle in long, deep cuts. Blood spread through the waves, mixing with the foamy spray around him. Adrian kicked frantically, his limbs thrashing as pain surged through his leg. The shark circled with alarming speed, drawn back toward the red cloud it had created. The beast lunged again, snapping at the jet ski that now bobbed riderless on the surface. Its jaws clamped onto the footrests, tearing the material apart and leaving jagged edges of broken fiberglass. The sound of crunching plastic echoed over the water. Adrian, still floating nearby, flailed with every ounce of strength he had left, fighting to stay above the surface while blood poured from his wounds. Fellow riders nearby raced toward the scene, paddling quickly and splashing the water to distract the predator. Their efforts drew the animal's attention for a moment, but the danger was far from over. The riders who had rushed forward formed a loose circle around Adrian, striking the surface with their arms and boards to create noise and confusion. The shark darted back toward the broken jet ski, snapping again at the ruined footrests and ramming the hull. Each strike sent sprays of foam into the air, the cracked fiberglass breaking into sharp fragments that floated across the tide. Adrian's body twisted weakly as he tried to keep his head above the waves, his legs heavy from the blood loss. Minutes stretched in terror as the predator circled again. Its dark shape moved beneath the waterline, disappearing and reappearing with bursts of speed. Every pass brought it close to the wounded rider. The sea around him turned into a swirl of foam, red current, and debris. His arms lashed out with desperate kicks, but his strength was fading quickly. The other riders shouted for help from the rescue boat anchored farther offshore, waving their arms to catch the attention of the crew. The predator made another charge, this time striking the underside of the machine and shaking it violently. More pieces broke free, drifting across the choppy waves. At last, after several long minutes, The shark veered away, disappearing into deeper water. Its tail flicked once and then slipped beneath the dark line of the sea. Seizing the chance, the group of riders pulled Adrian toward their craft. They heaved him up with effort, laying him flat across the deck. His wetsuit hung in strips, torn wide along his leg where deep cuts spilled fresh blood. Purple bruises marked his side and arms where he had been slammed against the jet ski and waves. He shook uncontrollably, the shock leaving his eyes wide and unsteady. Within minutes, the rescue boat reached them. Medical staff worked quickly to wrap his wounds and slow the bleeding while speeding toward the harbor. Sirens called across the coast as he was rushed to a hospital nearby. Surgeons treated the lacerations, stitching layers of torn muscle and cleaning the jagged tears left by the predator's teeth. Doctors reported that though the injuries were serious, he would recover with time. News of the incident spread across the Algarve region. Officials reminded visitors that shortfin macos, among the fastest and most aggressive species, are often drawn close to shore when prey is active. Safety warnings were issued for riders and swimmers, advising them to remain vigilant in deeper waters. For Adrian, the experience left more than physical scars. Once celebrated for his fearless moves, he faced long weeks of recovery and a heavy memory of what had happened. Although his body had healed, the memory of those minutes in the sea remained with him, a lasting reminder of the ocean's power and danger. On June 27, 2022, the clear waters of the Bahamas glistened under the midday sun. The shallow reefs near one of the islands had long been a favorite spot for divers and creative teams who wanted to capture striking scenes in the open sea. On this day, the reef became the setting for a unique underwater project. Among the group was Emily Carter, a 29-year-old model from California who had spent years building her career through bold and artistic shoots. She was renowned for her love of the ocean, her comfort in the water, and her ability to bring elegance to even the most challenging conditions. Emily had grown up along the Pacific coast, where she learned to swim before she could ride a bike. In her early 20s, she began combining her passion for the ocean with her modeling career. She gained recognition for breathtaking images taken beneath waves, often holding her breath for long stretches while posing gracefully. Her talent earned her opportunities to work with photographers around the world. By 2022, she was traveling frequently, balancing her career between runways, commercial work, and adventurous projects in the natural world. The Bahamas shoot was meant to showcase both her poise and the beauty of the reef environment. The creative team prepared carefully. Photographers set up lights and waterproof cameras, while assistants arranged fabric to flow freely in the water. Emily wore a long piece of soft material that trailed behind her like wings as she submerged. The scene was set to be ethereal, with sunlight filtering through the surface and beams dancing across coral and fish below. As the shoot began, Emily moved slowly in the clear water, twisting and stretching as the fabric floated around her. The cameras captured every motion. The flashes reflected off the rippling surface, creating sudden bursts of light that spread across the reef. Fish darted in and out of the coral, startled by the activity. Each moment became more dramatic as the team adjusted angles and directed her movements with gestures. Then, without warning, the calm atmosphere shifted. From the deeper blue beyond the reef edge, a massive shadow emerged. A tiger shark, close to 12 feet in length, approached with steady movements. Its body curved gracefully as it began circling, drawn by the motion of the fabric, the sudden bursts of light, and the vibrations in the water. At first, the team noticed the dark shape passing in the distance, but within seconds, the predator closed the gap. In a flash, it lunged, the powerful jaws clamped onto Emily's leg, shaking violently. The soft fabric wrapped around her as the shark twisted, turning the graceful scene into chaos. The water exploded with bubbles as her body was pulled downward. Photographers struck the surface with their hands and thrust poles toward the animal, trying desperately to drive it away. The equipment drifted as the beast thrashed again, snapping at the lights and tearing the cords free. Foam, blood, and fabric spread in all directions, clouding the reef in confusion. Emily struggled to break free, but the predator's strength dragged her lower into the depths. In seconds, she vanished into the blue, leaving the team above in shock and terror. The reef fell into silence after the predator disappeared into the deeper channel with Emily. The team at the surface flailed in confusion, their cameras floating away, their lights broken and useless. Bubbles trailed upward as they gasped for air, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. Some scrambled back toward the boat anchored nearby, while others struck the water in vain, hoping she might still rise from below. The bright cloth that had once flowed like wings now drifted in tatters, caught in the coral branches, stained and torn. Minutes passed that felt endless. Divers scanned the waterline with wide eyes, but there was no return. The predator had vanished completely into the deep trench, leaving only a cloud of silt and a spreading haze that shimmered across the reef. The sea that had seemed calm and clear before the strike now felt like a trap, every shadow carrying menace. The weight of what had unfolded pressed heavily on every witness. Rescue craft were called to the site. Local authorities arrived swiftly, alerted by the frantic messages from the team. Search divers entered the channel with powerful lights, sweeping the slope and crevices of the reef. They combed the drop-off where the predator had vanished, but the current had already carried away the signs. Hours of effort produced no recovery. Only broken gear, a shredded piece of fabric, and scattered poles remained to tell the story of what had taken place. The loss spread quickly through the island. News agencies reported the rare but devastating event, noting that tiger sharks were known to patrol shallow reef edges where food was plentiful. Experts explained that sudden flashes and floating material can mimic prey, triggering instinctive aggression in predators. The accident served as a poignant reminder of the fine line between art and hazard when humans enter wild environments with large predators present. Emily's family, friends, and colleagues were left in grief. Her career had been marked by bold projects that celebrated natural beauty, but this pursuit had ended in disaster. Fellow models and photographers expressed sorrow, remembering her as fearless and talented, someone who embraced risk to create striking images. Memorial gatherings were organized in her hometown, where people spoke of her achievements and her love for the ocean. For those who were present that day, the images of the attack remained vivid in their memory. The violent shift from beauty to horror replayed in their minds, haunting their nights long after leaving the island. Some chose never to enter the sea again, shaken by the suddenness with which calm water had turned into a place of fear. Local authorities increased patrols in the area and advised crews planning underwater projects to take greater precautions. Safety poles, protective cages, and avoidance of flashing equipment near known predator habitats became part of the guidelines. The site of the chute remained quiet for months, divers avoiding the reef where tragedy had struck. Though the ocean settled and life on the reef returned, the story stayed alive as a stark warning. Emily's final project became not a work of art, but a reminder of how quickly survival can be tested when humans step into the territory of apex hunters. On a sunny morning in 2023, the waves off Santa Cruz, California, rolled in steady sets, glimmering under the bright sky. Among the surfers was Ryan Mitchell, a 32-year-old outdoor enthusiast known among friends for his daring spirit and love for the sea. Raised in the Bay Area, Ryan had spent most of his weekends exploring the coastline, either hiking along cliffs or paddling into the Pacific on his board. Over the years, surfing had become more than just a pastime for him. It was his way of clearing his mind and staying connected to nature. Ryan was not alone that morning. Perched carefully on the nose of his surfboard was his small terrier, Max, a loyal companion that had been with him for 5 years. Max had joined Ryan on many coastal adventures, from camping trips to casual paddles along calmer bays. Friends often admired their bond, laughing at the sight of the dog balanced confidently while the surf carried them toward shore. For Ryan, combining his passion for the ocean with his dog's presence made the experience more special. On that particular day, he set out to perform a daring stunt for his friends, who were watching from the beach. The shoreline was lively, dotted with early risers walking the sand and surfers waiting for sets to build. Ryan pushed forward into the water, his arms slicing through the cool surface as Max shifted slightly but held his ground. The board glided across gentle swells until it reached the outer break. The pair waited, steady and calm, the horizon stretching endlessly ahead of them. Then, without warning, the calm scene was shattered. From below the surface, a massive figure rose with astonishing speed. A great white shark measuring close to 14 feet erupted from the depths. Its sheer size and force split the water, sending shockwaves across the waves. In a violent surge, the predator slammed into the board, the impact launching both man and dog into the air before crashing them into the churning surf. The board flipped, spinning helplessly as Ryan and Max splashed into the rolling water. Foam and spray filled the air as Ryan scrambled, trying to hold on to both his companion and the surfboard. The shark circled with menacing speed, its dorsal fin cutting through the surface as it closed in again. Each pass brought it dangerously close, snapping at the water near Ryan's limbs, testing its prey with sudden lunges. Ryan fought to keep Max above the surface, kicking and striking the water with frantic energy. His heart pounded as the predator lunged again. This time, its powerful jaws clamped down on his leg. The force ripped through the neoprene, leaving a deep gash that bled heavily into the sea. The water turned red as the shark thrashed, then released suddenly, circling once more in a spiral of foam. The struggle was far from over, and the surf now carried the smell of blood across the current. Ryan clung desperately to survival, knowing the next moments would decide both his fate and that of his small companion. The water around Ryan churned with white spray as the predator veered back into deeper circles. His body ached, his legs seared with pain, and the blood poured freely into the rolling surf. With one arm he held tight to Max, who struggled but stayed close, while his other hand pushed against the drifting board. Every kick burned, yet the need to survive forced him forward. The waves tossed both man and dog in a blur of foam and current, dragging them toward the shore but never fast enough. The predator's fin cut through the surface again. It circled with steady precision, moving wider arcs before rushing closer. The wide head and pale belly passed beneath them more than once, each pass stirring a new wave of fear. Ryan pressed against the board, pulling Max onto its center, trying to lift them both above the waterline. The animal lunged again, striking the underside of the craft with a heavy blow. The jolt nearly sent them tumbling once more, but Ryan managed to keep his grip. The shark made another pass, its jaws snapping near the edge of the board. Fiberglass cracked where its teeth struck, leaving sharp marks along the surface. Foam spread again across the tide, mixing with fresh streams of red. For a few endless seconds, it seemed certain the predator would continue until nothing was left. Yet just as suddenly as the chaos began, the massive shape sank back into the depths, the fin sliding under the rolling swells until it vanished completely. Ryan gasped for air, his chest heavy, his arms trembling as he dragged himself fully onto the damaged board. Max curled close to him, shaking but alive. Together they drifted toward the break zone, each push of water bringing them closer to sand. The current carried them through broken waves until finally other surfers reached their side. With quick paddles, they surrounded the board and guided it toward shore. When Ryan's feet touched sand, he collapsed. His leg poured blood, the torn neoprene hanging loose, exposing deep cuts that stretched across his thigh and calf. Friends on the beach rushed to help, pressing fabric against the wounds to slow the flow while calling for emergency crews. Max was carefully lifted from the board, shaken but unharmed, apart from exhaustion. An ambulance soon carried Ryan to a nearby hospital. Surgeons cleaned the lacerations, closed the torn flesh with long rows of stitches, and wrapped the leg tightly. The doctors warned of scars that would remain for life, but confirmed his recovery was certain. His survival was considered remarkable given the size and aggression of the animal. News of the incident spread quickly across the state. Experts explained that great whites often patrol the waters off Santa Cruz, particularly in warmer months when prey congregates near the shore. Officials placed warning signs along the beaches and urged surfers to remain vigilant. For Ryan, the memory of that morning stayed etched forever. He had faced one of the ocean's most feared hunters and lived to tell the story. The scar on his leg served as a constant reminder of the danger, while Max by his side symbolized the bond that carried them both through the ordeal. The event left the community shaken, yet united, serving as a shared reminder of how fragile every moment on the sea can be. On July 18, 2019, the heat shimmered above the waters of the Indian Ocean as a military transport helicopter patrolled the coastline near Mauritius. Among the 11 crew members on board was Captain Michael Harris, a 34-year-old pilot with nearly a decade of flight experience. Harris had joined the service after graduating from aviation school in London, drawn to a career that combined discipline and duty. His reputation was built on calm focus, making him one of the most trusted officers in his unit. Alongside him was Sergeant David Cole, a 28-year-old mechanic from Sydney, known for his sharp skills and steady temperament. The rest of the crew included communications specialists, engineers, and navigators, each trained to handle emergencies, but none expecting what would unfold that morning. The helicopter's mission was routine, scanning for vessels and monitoring activity in the region. The skies were clear, but mechanical failure struck without warning. A loud crack echoed through the cabin, followed by a sudden drop in power. Harris fought to keep the machine steady, but smoke filled the cockpit as alarms blared. Within seconds, the heavy craft lost lift, plunging toward the sea. Impact was violent. The fuselage smashed against the waves, breaking apart as water surged inside. The crew scrambled, unfastening straps and pulling themselves free before the machine sank. Adrenaline carried them as they gathered near the surface, clinging to inflatables and fragments of wreckage. Waves crashed around them, and the wreck disappeared beneath the deep blue. 11 men floated together, bruised and shaken, but alive. Relief was brief. Within the hour, shadows cut through the water. Dorsal fins surfaced, slicing the swells with slow precision. Oceanic whitetips, large and bold, had arrived. Known for approaching survivors of sea disasters, these predators wasted little time. They circled close, brushing against the men and nudging rafts with their snouts. Nervous eyes darted from fin to fin as the predators tightened their path. The first strike came without warning. A massive shark lunged, its jaws locking onto one man's torso. The sea erupted in red as he was dragged beneath in a violent thrash. Shouts and splashing filled the air, panic spreading instantly through the group. Some kicked wildly, others tried to pull themselves higher onto rafts, their hands trembling as the water churned. Moments later, another predator struck again, ripping through the side of an inflatable. Air hissed as the raft collapsed, pitching men into open water. Their cries carried across the waves as they fought to stay afloat, arms flailing and legs kicking while fins circled relentlessly around them. The survivors pressed closer together, but the predators showed no sign of leaving. For nearly an hour, the sharks harassed the group, bumping against debris and snapping at anything that drifted. Every minute felt endless, and every shadow below promised another strike. The survivors clung to what little they had left as the predators pressed in tighter circles. Every bump against a piece of wreckage sent men scrambling to pull their arms and legs away from the edge. The water was alive with motion, the powerful bodies of the sharks brushing and twisting beneath them. Tension gripped the group with every passing second. Muscles burned from exhaustion, yet no one dared stop kicking or pushing away fragments of debris to maintain their balance. Another lunge came, sudden and brutal. A shark surged upward and tore through floating material, pulling another man under in a burst of foam and spray. The sea boiled red before closing over him. His absence left the group in shock, fear tearing through their will to stay calm. Waves rolled over them, pushing survivors apart as the predators swept through once more. The sound of splashing and shouting mixed with the crash of water carried far across the empty ocean. The remaining men fought to stay close, pushing broken pieces together in a desperate effort to form a barrier. But the oceanic whitetips were relentless. One shark struck again, this time ramming against a larger raft. The impact sent bodies toppling back into the water, their limbs thrashing as the predators twisted beneath. Another man disappeared, dragged into the deep with violent force. Within an hour of the crash, 3 crew members, 1 communications specialist, 1 engineer, and Sergeant David Cole had already departed. The survivors endured the longest minutes of their lives as the animals continued to circle them. Teeth snapped at dangling boots, jaws clamped into canvas, and fins carved the surface in tight arcs. The men kicked, splashed, and struck at the water, every heartbeat pounding louder than the waves. Exhaustion began to show as their movements slowed, but they continued to fight on. At last, distant engines broke through the chaos. Rescue boats appeared on the horizon, growing larger as they closed the distance. The roar of motors filled the air, drawing the predators' attention. The sharks scattered briefly, slipping lower into the water as the boats pushed toward the wreckage site. Lines were thrown, and strong hands pulled the survivors out one by one. The men collapsed on the decks, their bodies shaking, their faces pale with shock. The aftermath was heavy. Medical teams treated cuts, bruises, and dehydration, wrapping the affected limbs and checking for signs of blood loss. The men spoke little, their eyes fixed on the sea as if expecting the fins to surface again. For many, the horror of those minutes in the water was worse than the crash itself. The sound of tearing canvas, the sight of red spreading across waves, and the loss of their brothers weighed heavily than the fall of the helicopter. News of the attack spread quickly. Officials called it a rare but deadly reminder of the dangers of the open ocean. The oceanic whitetip, often overlooked in comparison to other predators, had once again demonstrated why it was feared among sailors and aviators stranded at sea. For the survivors, the memory would never fade. Their return brought relief to families, but the scars of that day went deeper than the wounds on their skin. 3 men had been lost to the depths, leaving behind silence and grief. The survivors carried the story as a warning of how fragile life becomes when survival rests in the heart of the ocean. On July 6, 2025, the clear waters off Gansby, South Africa, sparkled beneath the midday sun. Known as the Great White Capital of the World, the region attracted countless visitors eager to see the predators that patrolled its coastlines. That morning, a luxury yacht had departed from the harbor, carrying a group of European travelers gathered for a birthday celebration. Music, food, and laughter filled the deck as they cruised along the scenic shoreline. Among the group was Lucas Weber, a 24-year-old tourist from Munich, Germany. Lucas had grown up in a family that valued travel. From an early age, he had visited different countries with his parents, developing a deep curiosity for the world beyond his hometown. Athletic and adventurous, he had a strong passion for the outdoors, spending weekends hiking in the Alps and summers sailing on Bavarian lakes. Friends admired his energy, his sense of humor, and his willingness to try new experiences. After finishing university, he decided to spend a portion of his savings on exploring destinations that had always fascinated him. South Africa, with its wildlife and rugged coasts, was at the top of his list. He had arrived with friends to mark a special occasion, eager to enjoy the blend of culture, scenery, and adventure. The yacht trip was one of the highlights of their itinerary, an opportunity to relax and take photographs against the backdrop of cliffs and open ocean. The vessel itself was spacious and elegant, its white hull gleaming under the sun, with a professional crew ensuring comfort and safety. The atmosphere on board was festive as the group gathered near the stern to pose for pictures. Glasses clinked, music played, and the sea stretched endlessly in every direction. Lucas leaned against the rail with a smile, unaware that the day would turn from celebration to terror in a matter of seconds. A sudden wave, larger than those before, struck the vessel broadside. The yacht rocked violently, tilting just enough to break the balance. Lucas lost his footing, arms flailing as he toppled over the polished rail. Shouts rose instantly as he splashed into the cold water below. The music cut short, replaced by chaos as the crew scrambled to respond. Life rings were thrown from the deck, their bright colors flashing against the rolling surface. Lucas kicked and reached, fighting to steady himself in the swell. But the commotion drew attention from beneath. From the dark depths, a massive shape emerged. A 14-foot great white shark, powerful and precise, surged upward toward the sound of splashing. The predator's body cut through the water with terrifying speed. In one motion it struck, jaws snapping shut around Lucas's leg. The impact dragged him downward in a swirl of foam. Blood burst into the water, clouding the surface and sending screams across the deck. Panic swept through the group as the crew shouted orders, grabbing poles and preparing to fight off the attacker. The shark thrashed, twisting violently as it pulled Lucas beneath the surface. The sight left onlookers frozen in horror. Above, the crew worked frantically, knowing every second counted. Engines roared to life as the vessel's stern churned the water while poles hammered against the waves in a desperate attempt to confuse the predator. The engines thundered as the yacht surged forward, churning the water into froth around the stern. The sudden noise and turbulence disoriented the predator, forcing it to loosen its grip. For a tense moment, the surface boiled with foam, then Lucas's body broke through, rising back toward the light. He gasped for air, blood trailing from the torn wetsuit at his leg. His arms flailed weakly as he tried to stay above the swell. Crew members leaned over the rails, thrusting poles and striking the sea with all their strength. Each blow was aimed at pushing the predator away, buying even a few precious seconds. The dorsal fin sliced through the surface once more, circling wider now, its pale belly glimpsed as it rolled beneath the waves. The tension on deck was unbearable. Every eye followed the shadow below, waiting for another rush. With practiced speed, the sailors threw out another flotation device, this time landing close enough for Lucas to grab. He clung tightly, his strength fading but his will to survive unbroken. Two men hauled him toward the side, pulling with urgent force until he reached the ladder. His dogged grip and the crew's determination saved him in those final moments. With one last effort, they dragged his battered body onto the deck. The sight was grim. His leg was deeply torn, long gashes stretching across muscle and flesh. Blood pooled beneath him as towels and fabric were pressed hard against the wounds to stem the flow. Lucas lay shaking, his face pale, his breathing shallow but steady. His friends stood frozen, some weeping, others gripping the rails as they stared into the red-tinged water below, where the predator had finally slipped back into the deep. The yacht turned sharply toward shore, its engines at full power, as the crew alerted the authorities. Within minutes, medical teams were waiting at the harbor. Lucas was rushed into an ambulance, his leg wrapped tightly, his condition critical but stable. At the hospital, surgeons worked for hours, repairing tissue and closing torn vessels. Doctors later confirmed he had lost a great deal of blood, but had survived against terrible odds. The news spread rapidly. Reports described the incident as a reminder of the risks associated with open water in areas known for their presence of great white sharks. Gansbai had long been famous for its predators, attracting thrill-seekers and researchers alike. But the attack highlighted how quickly danger could strike, even in seemingly safe conditions. Officials issued renewed warnings advising vessels to maintain caution and keep passengers away from the stern in rough seas. For Lucas, the recovery process stretched across months. He carried the scars of that day not only on his body but deep within his memory. The celebration that began with joy had ended in terror, changing his life forever.